Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of www.stressfreenow.info. Our featured guest today is Chris Cade, speaking on being in the zone of excellence. Chris Cade is a second-degree black belt and martial arts champion who has firewalked with Peggy Dillon, swum with wild dolphins in Bimini, and tested software to find the bugs. His journey, leaving a six-figure income and corporate life with Hitachi and Adobe for a spiritual one, has rewarded this visionary with the opportunity to serve hundreds of thousands of people worldwide in over 150 countries. Chris is also a grateful full-time father. We're happy to have Chris back on the show today as he and Bob discuss being in the zone of excellence.
Hi, welcome. Today we have Chris Cade with us again. He is a remarkable individual. Chris, thank you for coming back and talking with us again.
You're welcome, Bob. I'm looking forward to having some fun together.
Great. All right. For the audience's listeners who may not be familiar with your background or who you are, even though we know you're famous, can you just tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do, Chris?
Yeah. The short version is I teach online personal development and spirituality through e-courses, audios, social media, interviews like this, any means by which I can help empower people to change their lives. That's how I'm trying to show up online.
Great. So, Chris, just to start us off, I just would like to talk about this issue of being in the zone of excellence or being in the flow. And, you know, it's known by many names, and I know you're familiar with it, especially the benefits. Could you just talk a little bit about what it feels like to be in the zone and why someone would want to be there?
Yeah, the feelings of being in the zone really are around ease and effortlessness. You know, when we're in the zone, what we notice is that we don't have to do a lot of thinking. We're not really in our heads, and that allows us to tap into the innate wisdom that's within our bodies, within our unconscious minds, so that we can actually do whatever it is we're tasked with doing in a way that feels effortless. It doesn't mean we're not working. I mean, you know, some of the fastest runners and, you know, Olympic athletes, they talk about being in the zone, in the flow, and they're working harder than probably anybody we know. But to them, the feeling is of ease and effortlessness when they are actually in that zone. Because what happens is our focus, our attention, our energy just moves right in the direction of where we're headed. And we naturally align ourselves with all of the energies around us, in us, so they're all moving in the same direction. And that's why it can feel easeful, effortless, energizing. That can also be a thing. It seems dichotomous to have, you know, ease and energizing, but really the two work very well together in accomplishing goals, in succeeding, in growth, any endeavor where, you know, writing, another really great example. Like, you know, you could write, you know, hundreds or thousands of pages or type them up and have it not feel like anything when you're in that flow state, when the words are just coming through you and translating out. You know, and that's one of the ways in which I love that you and I play here on interviews is because, you know, we don't show up with a preset of a lot of questions. I don't know what you're going to ask. So the only way I can be present with you and actually serve you and everybody listening is to actually be in that flow state, to tap into it, to relax my body, relax my mind, and just trust that whatever you ask me, I know somewhere within me the right answer already, whatever that right answer is. And it could change moment to moment, so it's not like there's some objective right answer that I'm looking for, but the right answer for the moment is going to flow through and out of me. And so that's just, you know, one way we can tap into it, but also a little bit about what it feels like when we're in that space.
Great, Chris. When you were talking, what I was thinking about was that I know when I've been in that zone, it's like a magical place. there seems to be no sense of wasted effort. And one of the things that is really clear to me, and I'd like to know if you have the same experience, is that the way that you pay attention when you're zoned shifts the way that you experience time and space. And so specifically, what I've noticed is that depending on what kind of flow state I'm in, and that's an important point. There's not just one type of being in the zone flow state. You know, for example, as you're saying, like Wayne Gretzky, when he was just doing the amazing things on the ice, he's in one kind of flow state, you know, versus someone else that may be meditating in a flow state. So one of the things that I've noticed, and I wanted to know if you've had the same experience, is that the shift in time, I've noticed that usually time slows down or time speeds up. So I have either a time elongation where it just, you know, everything seems to be in slow motion almost, or like if I'm playing like a game and really enjoying it, like I don't notice I've been on the computer for 3 hours, or, you know, I'm doing some other activity. So do you have that same experience, and do you think that that's a general quality of being in the zone, that it changes the way we perceive time?
That's an interesting question. And when I think about my perception of time and being in flow states, you know, for me it's less about whether the time goes longer or shorter, or perceived longer and shorter. What I really notice in my experience is a timelessness. And so it feels like time is in a way suspended. And it's not really about shorter or longer. It's that I'm just simply not aware of time passing. And so, you know, maybe it'll be faster, maybe it'll be shorter, but with flow and the presence, for me, I just noticed that it seems like I'm so immersed in the experience that time isn't a construct that I'm aware of. So I don't really care whether or not it feels longer or shorter, because at the end of the day, in that experience of flow, one of the required qualities is being present. And that's, you know, kind of one of my true norths in the world is being present, pursuing the truth of my experience at the moment. And so I can't really speak so much to the sense of it being elongated or shortened in the context of flow. Now, I can say that there have been scientific studies that have looked at the brain states that we have and the way we pay attention in moment, and that when we are enjoying our time, time often tends to pass more quickly. And when we are not enjoying time, it tends to pass more slowly. So in that context, I could speak to when we are in the state of ego, when we're in the state of our mind grasping, our mind reaching, trying to get something, then time often feels like it's going slower, because it's almost like every moment is reaching for that thing that we don't have that we want. Whereas when we're in a flow state, at least for me, I find that experience of time tends to be shortened as compared to when I'm in the state of ego. But I don't have a good comparison point in my own experience for different flow states on their own, because to me they all have the timeless quality that I experience of presence and being in the moment.
Wow, that's fantastic. I thank you for that, Chris, because when I think about the timelessness, what it makes me think about is state-bound experience. That, for example, when you have certain experiences, it can really only be understood at that level of experience. And you know, sometimes people will say, well, what was happening here? And you're like, well, this person was in the zone. I remember years ago being at a nightclub in Manhattan, and I saw a gentleman who was a comedian. And he actually was the following act after this group, D-Train. And they were doing the first live satellite broadcast. This was in the early 80s, so that was a big deal back then, you know, being broadcast by satellite live. And so this comedian guy came out to warm up the crowd. And he was incredible. I mean, and to give you an idea, that he ended his act doing James Brown in Japanese, and the crowd went crazy. That's the only way I could describe it. And I just remember it was just like I remember it just like it was last week. It was that clear demarcation in my memory. So, for our audience, just to understand, the reason I'm bringing up this story is that I was so elated at the performance of the comedian that I rushed up, it was a small nightclub, so I rushed up to him to congratulate him and saying, oh my gosh, that was one of the most fantastic performances I've ever seen. And I remember when I went to shake his hand, he looked right through me. Right? He stuck his hand out, but he I was there, but he wasn't there in the same way. And that was the first time that, in the early 80s, I remember being aware of someone being in a different state, significantly different state. And so he after he finished his performance, he was on a natural high, and so I can't say exactly where he was physically. He was in front of me, but that was the first time I actually became aware, this is an example of something else happening. And at that time, I didn't know about this other stuff, the books written about the zone of excellence, et cetera, hadn't at least I had not read any of that material at that time. So, Chris, let me ask you this. We're talking about the zone of excellence. What, in your opinion, stops people from being able to experience and generate that type of experience for themselves?
Well, the simple, most simplistic answer, which is obviously the most complex, is not being present. When we are not in the moment, we cannot be in flow state. We cannot access it, because flow state is a quality of presence. It's a way that we experience the world when we are so immersed in the present moment that anything that's distracting, anything that's not relevant, not present, anything that is not part of the natural movement of life is outside our realm of consciousness. It's just not relevant. And so we have to be present in order to access flow state. So in the most simplistic terms, anything that keeps us from being present is something that prevents us from being in a flow state. So it could be, in my body of work, that we've talked about before, self-criticism. That's a really common one. If we're judging ourselves, saying we're not worthy, good enough, can't do it, everybody gets it better, we're not lovable, we don't have the talent, the skills, we're not good enough, whatever it is that we are judging ourselves for, we are automatically disconnecting from flow state. Similarly, if we're judging other people, any judgment we have about ourselves is also something we might be putting out into the world. That person's not good enough, not worthy, they can't hold their own, they are judgmental. Whatever it is that we're projecting out as a judgment towards others is also preventing us from being present. And so I always look at judgment as kind of the number one, or not the number one, but the first barrier we have towards presence, because it's so unconscious and so running in the background all the time that we can even not be aware that it's taking shape in our body rather than our mind. So we might feel judged, and in that we might feel compressed in our bodies, tight, tense, pushed down, pushed back. We might feel constricted, but our minds might just be thinking like, oh, I'm tense right now, right? Our minds may not be consciously aware that what happened was someone said something 3 hours ago, criticized us, our energy went down, and we haven't let it go, and our bodies are holding on to it, even though our minds think that we're past it. We think, oh, I did my forgiveness practice and everything else, but our bodies actually are holding on to it still, because it's a lot of criticism can be unconscious. So where that's pointing to is not only the conscious criticism that we have of ourselves or others, or the judgments, but also our body state. To be in flow state, there does need to be a way in which we are relaxed in the moment. Now, that's not to say that we're not an athlete pushing our bodies to the maximum, or a writer getting, a cramp in our hand from writing for hours and loving that moment. But the point is that there is a relaxation in the way we experience our bodies, that we're not pushing against our bodies. We're not pushing against, even if tension is present, which is fine, we're not pushing against the tension, saying it shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be tense, I hate this tension, any of those kinds of subjective experiences towards the tension or towards our bodies. Instead, it's like, oh, this is what's here, right? So we can be in a flow state, even with physical pain, physical tension, and things like that. But the point is that we're not pushing against that tension. So there's, any number of things that, again, keep us from being in the present moment, just distraction. If we have, our phones around us or alarms or clocks or anything that's pulling our attention away from the present moment, we are more likely to get out of a flow state. So if I'm saying, I'm going to write for 30 minutes, let's say, and I'm really trying to step into that flow state, the worst thing I can do is have a clock in front of me with a timer, because that sets my mind focusing on the clock, the timer, an external object, and not on my internal experience of being present. So if we're going to access a flow state and we say, I want to write for 30 minutes, set an alarm, set a timer, set it aside, not anywhere within your vision state, and just start writing. And trust that when the 30 minutes is up, you're done, if that's what you have allocated for your time. So in flow state, it's not so important that we avoid the realities of our world. It's that we are present with the realities of our world in a way that we minimize the distractions and focus on what it is we want to accomplish. So there's, we could literally list probably hundreds of blockages to flow state because it's anything that keeps us from the present moment.
Great, Chris. Thank you for that. And audience, we'll be back after a short break.
Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or following a treasured dream? Hi, this is Christine Wright. I specialize in helping my coaching clients to lay out clear, goal-achieving strategies. I show you how to quickly build your confidence and uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Let me help you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let me know that you're curious about how to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact. Are you dealing with stress, burnout, chronic pain, anxiety, or unresolved grief? Dr. Robert Wright, Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, is an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. Co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series, Dr. Bob holds a Ph.D. in Transformative Studies and a master's degree in psychology. He is the author of the first published study to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, and nitric oxide spiking and the relaxation response. He has a wealth of practical knowledge which helps you to relieve the stresses of everyday life so you can live longer and play with your grandchildren. Work with Dr. Bob and he'll give you the tools you need to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email him to find out how you can start to feel better at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free. Our featured guest today is Chris Cade. Chris, before the break, you were talking about flow states, and as we wind down this part of the interview, I want to just ask you if you could differentiate between two things that for some people they may experience them as the same thing, but I believe we both may see them as separate. So the two things I'd like you to identify and just discuss briefly are, what's the difference, or compare and contrast peak performance versus peak experience? Could you lay that out for our audience?
Yeah, peak performance and peak experience, they can be the same thing, like you pointed to, but they are actually distinctly separate qualities. So the peak experience is when we are in such a state of presence, such a state of the moment that our experience is amplified, whether that's tasting the most delicious dessert we've ever had, and we are savoring it one bite at a time. That can be this peak experience kind of thing. When our sense of hearing is heightened, our sense of touch is, heightened again. Anytime our senses are heightened considerably and we are just deeply in the present moment, this gives us the opportunity for peak experience. It's to experience the moment in a much more grand and more a deeper way than we might normally under normal states of consciousness. Peak performance, it can have those qualities, but it's really about the movement in the outer world. Peak experience is about movement towards the inner world. What are we taking in? Who are we being? How are we perceiving and experiencing the world? Peak experience is about moving, peak performance is really about the movement out. It's about the action. It's about how are we actually manifesting our experience in the outer world, and that's usually going to lead to greater levels of success and easier goal achievement, because what we're really doing is saying it's not just about me feeling these wonderful sensations of taste, of touch, of hearing. What happens with I'm losing the words, experience and
that's why I gave it to you, because when I started, I remember when I initially started looking at peak experience and peak performance, there is an aspect where they overlap. But what I think you've done a brilliant thing here. I actually have not thought about peak experience and peak performance as an inner and outer in that way, in the way that you just framed it. So it's very helpful. I have, my own views on it, but I really like what you have said, that thinking of peak experience as a, inner reflective type thing, and the peak performance being the actual outer action exterior. So that's a fantastic model.
I'm glad that's supportive for you, because it really feels true for me when I think about, my martial arts experience, and how much when I would be competing, I really was in that performance state. And I wasn't as aware in many cases of hearing or of sensation or even my inner experiences in those times. My body was so much, all of my energy was into autopilot in doing what I had trained my body and mind to do, which was to just completely rocket and succeed and perform at the highest level I was capable of. And at that point in my life, I didn't have the capacity to hold both peak experience and peak performance in the same space. And that was something that it's been over time where I've developed that capacity. And what I've found is that the more I integrate the two, the easier it is to actually perform at a peak level. And I think there's an opportunity there where when people see them as the same thing, that doesn't mean that they are. But if they can experience peak experience and peak performance separately, to know the distinct difference, and then come towards performance with the intention and the energy of peak experience, if they can really say, how can I bring myself fully to this experience, to what I'm doing, they will actually find their peak performance will increase even greater. So it's really a wonderful gift when people can integrate the two in a very full way. They'll find that they can do phenomenal things they didn't think they could do before. To compare it back to martial arts, like I said, when I was younger, it was all about the performance and not about the experience. And so I was able to do some pretty incredible things, and it required a lot of training. And I took 12 years off of martial arts. I went into the corporate world, family, did a bunch of stuff. It took a backseat. Well, when I came back to martial arts and was training just casually, not even seriously for competition, one of my coaches I was around, I would basically say, you know what, I think you could teach me to do this technique in 5 minutes. And it was a technique that when I was younger, I had trained for 3 months and could barely do. And suddenly, somehow, after going down the spiritual path and focusing on peak experience and developing my qualities of presence, I somehow had this perhaps delusional belief that he could teach me something in 5 minutes that I couldn't do in months and takes some people years. And he and I both took the challenge, and I think it took 7 or 8 minutes. And I was able to do it at the level of national and international competition, to the point where if I were to keep practicing it on that level, it would become perfect and innate in my physiology. But the fact that I was able to do it once beautifully at a competitive level after just a few minutes of coaching, because what I knew is that if I did something, he would give me feedback and say, do this with your arm, this with your leg, and this. And because I had the qualities of presence, because I could take that peak experience in, I could then adapt in the moment to actually step into what he was pointing to, where he was taking me. And it, like I said, it only took a few times for me to get there. And if I continued to do that, that's the integration of peak experience and peak performance. I was performing at my best potential in a very short time because I brought in peak experience. And if I'd continued practicing that, then that peak performance would only get better, and it would become more implicit, more integrated. And so, yeah, that's just an example of where we have the opportunity to bring both together to create a magic that wouldn't be present with either one individually.
Great, and I kind of want to wrap up on that note, because when you were talking, it made me think of two things. The first was years ago I read an article talking about a guy who was a high-level scuba diver and a high-level photographer, and what he had done was he had gone down pretty deep. I forget how many atmospheres he went down, and he took some amazing pictures. And so the thing is that he got these amazing pictures, he had this amazing experience, but it was only when he got back and he was home and he realized that his whole experience was behind the camera, so he did not actually experience it. He had the pictures, which he was
right.
there to show, but he didn't actually. He was only after the fact that he realized that he did not have the experience because he was behind the lens the whole time. And then I wanted to just segue into this other issue, which you kind of implicit in what you talked about, is that I believe the reason that you could learn that in 8 minutes is because you had the previous background, the thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, the 10,000 plus hours for mastery, etc. But the reason I bring that up, Chris, is that I read a blog post several months ago, and I was shocked that, it was Malcolm, actually I think it was a podcast where Malcolm Gladwell was being interviewed. And he said that, to my shock, and I imagine other people were shocked too, he said that when his book came out, he was startled to see that the media was zeroing in on his this thing about the 10,000 hours, because he just did that as like an aside. He said that his point was that in order for someone to have mastery and to have at least 10,000 hours, he was trying to debunk the lone genius myth, that they would have to have some kind of support system. A person makes the Olympic Games and wins the gold medal. Well, there's this whole support system, their family, their school, and, there are other things behind. And he was saying that you can't get to the 10,000 hours without the support system. But he said that got lost in the message. So as I said, I think in your case, the reason you could do it in 8 minutes is because you had that past history. You already had the muscle memory and the mental discipline, the ability to focus. You had all the other correlates already in your toolkit, and it wasn't just like you came to this and say, oh, I can do this in 8 minutes. You know what I'm saying? You weren't a novice.
Right.
You were already at the expert level. So, Chris, I want to thank you for being our featured guest today. and thank you for the interview. Before we go, please tell our audience how they can get in touch with you if they would like to work with you or have you come speak to them or just get in touch with you to learn more about the work that you do.
Yeah, just visit my website at chriscade.com, CHRISCADE.com, and that has plenty of ways to either interact with my work, my products, coaching, connect with me for speaking, anything that you want to reach. There's an easy way with a help desk link on that website. That'll go to my assistant, and she can coordinate anything we need to do that requires real-time stuff. Otherwise, feel free just to check out the blog posts and free resources and see if anything resonates with you.
Great. So, audience, you can go to chriscade.com and find out all the things you need. So, Chris, what final thoughts or key idea would you like our audience to take away from today's broadcast?
Focus on the present moment. Do whatever you need to do to bring yourself into this moment right here and eliminate anything that distracts you from the present moment, because without presence, without being here now, flow state is absolutely impossible.
Great. Thank you for that, Chris. And so thank you for listening wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now. We certainly appreciate your presence, and we trust that you'll benefit in some way from the information that we delivered during today's podcast show. We welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about our show. Please let us know if there are additional topics you'd like to see us cover or a guest you enjoyed so much that you'd like us to invite them back. Please contact us through our website with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how to get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and you'll receive a free gift from us. Call or email us today to schedule your appointment. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of www.stressfreenow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.